Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being there. I've heard the conference has been so far amazing, and I hope my presentation will kind of like also being part of it, this inspiration. I will start by sharing my screen, and let's enter, and maybe just start by mentioning, like, I guess why, and also the title of the reason I've been invited here, and therefore also the title and of my presentation today, which more than a presentation, I feel it's also it collects a series of ideas and reflections that have guided also what I've tried to do practically in the curatorial work. Try to investigate the notion of time, movement through performance in spaces that were like partially, you know, called like every space is public if everybody can have access, but who has access where and to what? So it's always the question sort of like to be asked. But one aspect that I've always fascinated me has always been the capacity of the moment of encountering art, especially through performance, as a special, like I would say, a moment in which the subject feels the ground zero of the encounter between the subject and the artistic object. And I decided to call that, or I felt that that space was a space of intimacy. And therefore, my whole sort of reflection today leads us a little bit like in reflecting what does it mean really to create a space of intimacy in relation to the artistic practice, but also the curatorial work that we are doing. And I would say, like, also, how do we bring this from a testing ground of an art institution or an art platform into a space that is largely collective, because it's a space where everybody walks, it's a space where everybody, you know, has access, it's a space where everybody, even outside the art, sort of bumped into. So where to start? I mean, before the pandemic, I used to be a pretty hectic globetrotter, I guess, like everybody. And I always felt that the notion that moving my body to different places and different locations would also be a matter of self-regeneration for my mind. And you might say, well, this is what we all experience. But at the same time, what kind of like what I immediately perceived when we had all to stop was that regardless our human body being still, the whole universe was moving around us. And there's, in a way, like also bringing our minds and our lives into a different understanding of time, but also a different understanding of like space and how this body, you know, moves into the space, and what also like what this means. So thinking about like movement as a self-regeneration act, I started really conceiving on how, I mean, how the artistic practice, but I mean, maybe speaking more like as a curator, how as a curator, I could sort of like test or recreate like hybrid ecologies, and for hybrid ecologies, I mean, structures in which different forms of inhabiting the world, whether this is the visual, the sound, whether this is like exactly the moving body or the moving image, could actually coexist, and in this place of coexistence, create this hybrid or, you know, experimental way of being. And having said that, I had, wait, is it? Yeah. Having said that, I had an opportunity the same year, last year, to develop a program in conjunction with Enter Art Fair. I've been working with Enter Art Fair in Copenhagen, which is the international art fair that takes place in the north of Copenhagen, in Tunnelfabriken. I had the chance to sort of like to have a space that was supported by the Danish Art Council and the Dreyer Fund and other like public foundation in Denmark, where people could enter for free. And I wanted to, in a way, I wanted to sort of like kind of bring this notion of time that we had all experienced, a time that is perceivable, but it's not sort of countable, and that we all sort of like felt during the pandemic, and maybe that other subjects feels in their daily life, because being in the non-heteronormative understanding or way of conceiving time, which is anyway an imposition, So thinking about that, I've been really thinking, how can I bring, how can we create this feeling of time? And I was in conversation with an artist from originally from Canada, who has studied with the Marina Abramovic, and who is now a very international recognized performance artist. His name is Miles Greenberg. I had the chance to meet him back in the days in New York, and I was fascinated by the rigor and the methodology that he had in understanding performance and endurance in performance, not just as a struggle in keeping this performance lasting so long, but the opposite, as a capacity of stretching the heteronormative understanding of time and create an expansion, in which time dilates and the viewer, but also the performers, themselves, they don't perceive anymore if it's an hour, if an hour has passed, or if 2 hours, or if it's just 10 minutes. And this understanding, in a way, in discussing with him about how to create this, he pointed a very interesting aspect that, in a way, he wanted to create a living sculpture. But any sculpture is a living sculpture, because time erodes it, because time creates this performance that changes the structure of even the materiality. And in a way made me think a lot about how we conceive the body, that we think it's such a moving body, but in a way it's also eroded by time. And it actually makes a difference the way we live the time also on the structure of the body. So I kind of enter into these different areas. And all of a sudden I kind of realize, once we enter into this expanded, or maybe actually that's the wrong word, pardon, it's not really an expansion of time, but a parallel dimension of understanding time, not as a linear sequence of facts that goes from A to Z, and then and maybe from 1 to ad infinitum, but actually an opposite, a space in which anything can happen, and everything is outside of the sort of conventional understanding. And when I thought about that, I always thought that my encounter with the art has always been a space of dilatation, of altered timing, of collapsing of timing and tense. And all of a sudden I kind of realized, but that's also the same feeling that, that we have when we feel comfortable, when we feel close to something, when we feel in a space where we are nude, we are naked, there is nothing to hide. And that's actually when this ground zero that I was mentioning, this moment in which you as a audience encounter the work of art, that regardless the artist has its own life. And I was really fascinated by this, because thinking about this nakedness and nudity, I actually understood that that's also what we feel when we are with our partners, when we are in love, when we are in a very intimate and close friendship. There is nothing that's sort of that, there is nothing else in between, and there is no time that separates, no notion of conventional time that separates this. So what we tried to do with Miles was exactly to create this actually in a space that I would have never even thought it would work, because at a public space in a parallel in conjunction in a parallel location of an art fair, when I mean everything, everybody that's sort of is more into the materiality of the work of art come and encounter an ephemeral place, but an ephemeral piece. But more than ephemeral, I would say, I mean, this was more material, you know, the materiality of the bodies was more materially speaking present rather than a painting or a piece of sculpture or a video. So what Miles tried to create was to create a viewing device, which consisted in an aquarium, and it was obviously like to create a sort of like panopticon in which basically the subject included in this aquarium, like we all have when we look at fishes, will be subjected to the gaze of the person standing outside of this aquarium. So he wanted really also to play with the inside and outside, and also what with the notion of timing and intimacy that this will create, like how you know, how a barrier structure prevents the people outside, so the audience, to get closer to the subjects, to the performers, but vice versa also, how this would in a way the transparency would sort of also like create this immediate connection, you know. So we really reflected a lot also on the notion, of course, of the colonial gaze in being in Denmark, in a very white country, and with a colonial history that yet is facing sort of like struggling in being sort of unpacked and unfolded and also digested and acknowledged. It was definitely a provoking work, because the viewer didn't know how to sort of approach with having two almost naked black bodies embraced in the kindest and most romantic gesture that sort of would resemble the Western canons of the sculpture, which was this embrace, like a Rodin's embrace, standing on this rock, and in a sort of like aquarium from which like a drop will slowly, you know, erode the capacity of endurance of these performers. And so the whole idea was really to create an infinite gesture, to let also the visitors asking, like, did they move? Did they not move? When did it start? And in many ways, that's also when I started thinking about this dilatation of time for my very limited human mind, but also understanding of a larger, you know, definition of time. I started really thinking about how to bring this endurance of the body also, and how to bring this shift of perspective in a space where, you know, people won't just go because they love art and they have heard that there is something happening in the city, so they will go there, but actually to people that will never go to any of the art events. So I start really thinking, like, can we, if we have imposed for centuries monuments in public space to visually signify the power play of, you know, of the politics of the location of the cities and you know, of our nations, then I start thinking, well, can we sort of like use the same strategy, but to bring not sculptures, not monuments, but actually to work on a space where people would encounter art will actually live with the people and would be as in movement, but at the same time as changing as we are all every day, aging as we are all, changing our perspectives as we are all. So the whole project really that also like Joanna was mentioning, and that recently won the Bikuben Vision Award in May 2021, and which will be presented in 2023 in the whole city of Copenhagen, sort of sparkle on this from this perspective. As a curator, I mean, I like to say that I'm more I like to say that I'm both like a sort of choreographer, which creates or could, you know, that we always have a potential. I don't want to say that I am and I do, but I'm trying to be a choreographer where I mean, I create spaces in where people move around. So in a way, I choreograph the movements also of the audience in relation to the works. I feel like we are all in a way writers of narratives also, and we try to collect ideas that we get from our lives, and from, of course, from how much are we inspired by the artists and their research and their work, and also their approach to life, and in a way also, like, we're sort of like architect of urban spaces. This sort of like scientific division of like roles and tasks, architects, artists, designers, is always, or curators, you know, is always like very sort of like scientifically or encyclopedically driven. But in a way, we live in a complex, layered world, and it has always been like that. It's just that in order to make in order to understand a little bit how to navigate this whole complexity and unpacking it, then we assign roles. And one of my sort of like forever and ever interest has been the universe, and I don't know anything about the universe. Or at least I'm getting to know a little bit more. But I was really fascinated by the fact that that when we look at the universe, when we look at the sky, we feel this kind of like closeness, proximity, the same proximity that we feel when, at least that I feel. I don't want to generalize for everybody. When we look at a work of art, this kind of like aperture towards like an infinity amount of possibilities to explore. And yet, you know, like this inspiration, but also like the kind of sometimes impossibility of like articulating what is that we are actually feeling, which is, again, in a way, what we feel when we are in love. This like wave of feelings, wave of presence of life that just really pushes and pushes to be in a movement, to be alive. And so in a way, I really started thinking, well, how could we thinking about movement as a self-regenerative gesture, you know, and thinking about like these moments of encounters, these spaces of intimacies that we create when we are in close proximity with, I mean, with human beings, but also with larger questions of the world. I kind of started thinking like that artists operate, and scientists mainly operates in a similar ways like scientists, or in particular like astrophysics, because I mean, these astrophysics, they, in order to even like provide a worldview or like a view of the universe, they need to think in abstract terms, because if they don't think in abstract terms, and if they don't calculate, mathematically speaking, all these supposed abstractions, they won't be able to reach the next scientific data. And in a way, artists operate in a more like loose sense, because they have the same they have the possibility of experimenting without needing to provide data, or at least like that's again like the sort of encyclopedical assumption. But what if we switch? What if we enter in an hybrid terrain? And what if artists are capable of inspiring a different perspective to scientists? What if scientists are actually not just telling what science learned yesterday to the artists in order to create this art and science connection, but actually really cooperate, work together, inspire each other? It seems so, I mean, nowadays we live in a society in which more and more like humanism and all the subjects connected to the university studies are sort of like given a different role and less importance. But inspiration is everything in life. It's everything for human to make the next discovery. And we kind of keep forgetting, and that's the biggest problem. So when I started thinking about how we could actually create a project that would bring different fields of expertise to enter in an unknown terrain, I actually I wanted since the beginning to sort of like work in crafting the public space with a script that will be sort of like, that will give to people, to citizens, different way of codifying movement, different possibilities of understanding the city, of living the city in a different way. Now, I don't know how, I mean, I don't know if I'm on the right trajectory, but let's say that what the body can do by moving differently in the space is that, as I said, crafting a space of inhabiting and crafting a new reality. There is an interesting approach to this aspect by professor in dance and choreography from NYU, Andre Lepecki, who says that everybody creates this corporeality, you know, and the corporeality is like it's connected to the way in which an enfleshed a body enfleshes political and social existences in many different ways, and changes also the way in which these spaces where the body exists are perceived. So thinking also about this connection between space of intimacy, time, timing, tense, duration, movement, I decided to bring into the conversation the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen, especially the Dark Cosmology Center, the CERN in Geneva, and the Interactive Mind Center at Aarhus University, and then the Mode Lab, Center for Choreography and Dance at the University of California in UC Davis. Those were actually I would say research centers that I've always sort of like been interested in. That's maybe also why when I was preparing dinner, I put all these ingredients, you could say. I could have chosen many others. So when we talk also about the sort of like methodology, I could have chosen many others, but I think as a driven by this desire, like I brought the most inspirational for me. And I work in close collaboration with Copenhagen Contemporary to develop this project that in the end actually won the Bikuben Vision Award. And my understanding, I don't know, wait, am I doing?
You can't move to the next.
Maybe this, that,
yeah. Good.
And so my understanding was actually, how do we create spaces, how do we reflect on movement? The title of the whole project is Yet It Moves, and is of course inspired by Galileo Galilei's famous quote when in front of the Inquisition, he was asked to deny the fact that the sun was the heliocentric system, and his like last, of course, his last word was, well, but yet it moves, yet the earth moves around the sun. And I've been thinking about this in relation to the body, you know, in relation to the fact that even when the body stays still, everything moves. And it's quite crazy, because then it's very also connected to notion of survivances that are very close to also to indigenous understanding and indigenous way you know, life viewward, which is that everything in a way regenerates. There is no sort of like past always return if it's unresolved, and when is it that past is not resolved? So in a way, also thinking about life and death and these cycles, I found fascinating the fact that we kind of like perceive our life from birth to death as a cycle in a way, but we don't think about most of the time about the regenerative one, and in many ways, you know, stars operates the same way. Stars in the universe explodes, and the gases that are generated by the explosion of the stars collapses by gravity, and all of a sudden like form a new matter to create a new stars. And so in a way, I really started thinking, like, how can we bring all these reflections that also bring us to perceive our life in a larger scope, rather than in this minute of waking up every day, going to work, having to do this, having to do that, and feeling frustrated for that. Of course, I mean, I'm not saying that with this perception could not take place. But I was really and the whole and everybody also in the project was really thinking like, how can we bring inspiration? How can we bring a new way of meaningfully perceived life? Even if this happens for the 7 month of duration of this project, even if it happens one day, even if it happens, I don't know, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, nobody knows. I mean, we don't know the extent of our action until we haven't done them. So, and maybe not even. So, and that's also the interesting part again on reflecting about like time and the human life in relation to this sequence and consequences of our action. So just to kind of also present you very briefly what this project is about. Hopefully, this whole project will also somebody in the audience or somebody that will like hear this record later will maybe come back finding it interesting, by finding also like a new an interesting project to collaborate. What we wanted to sort of create was like 3 areas of investigation, meaning the movement above us, so working together closely with the Niels Bohr Institute and the researchers at DARC, to kind of like really work on how the cosmic movements above us, more than in the sky, never say in the sky, they affect the way also we sort of like perceive life and perceive our existences. One thing that I was really like discussing with Jens Hjort, who has been one of our partner at the Niels Bohr Institute, was exactly that as a tiny scientific discovery has the potential of impacting largely the way in which we perceive the world. So, and then the other part was movement around us. So the way in which all particles, that are composing our body like affects us. And then the other one is like movement within us. So how memory also, and the memory patterns that we have from our ancestors and from our DNA, from the whole surrounding, also from epigenetic reasons, affects the way we move and the way also we change the space through our movement. Now I'm running out of time, but the idea is exactly like to create an expanded perception of an expanded project that goes beyond saying, oh, I've done my art tour today, so switch off. I've seen the art, like I've read this part of the book, or I've done my studies, and then I can go. In a way, we are really interested in creating like something that stays every day. And potentially even beyond this project. So like working in public space with the metro, with the new metro of Copenhagen, and also working with like existing building. This is one of the artists that we have that we are working with is Nona Turato. How can also like we can work with and she's working with IMC, with Interactive Mind Center, on how also the brain creates language, and language creates space. And we move through the space. Even when we say like, you can't enter in this space, already saying that is a script that impact the way in which not only we articulate and we talk about that space, but also the way in which we move around that space. So, I mean, we always feel that everything is super detached, but everything is super connected, interconnected, I would say. So, yeah, the whole idea would be, now, this is a Ryoji Ikeda work that we would like to present in public space. But the whole point, and I want to thank you for your time and attention, because I know that I've like done a little bit longer than my time, but it's exactly like to, if you ask me what is the final purpose of not only this curatorial work that I'm doing now, but also in general of like working with performance and in public space, is exactly like to create this switch, this tiny but like fundamental switch of perspective. Once you see the world from another viewpoint, then the whole life changes, and the whole movement changes, and the whole body changes, and the mind as well. And yeah, we can do a lot in that perspective. Maybe in the arts we can't make revolution, but we can definitely start the sparkle. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Irene. Would you mind stopping to share your screen so we can see you in
Yes.
bigger? Yes, fantastic, great. So the audience can see you again. Before we take a round of questions, I just want to say that your project, Yet It Moves, is really impressive. I mean, the range of institutions that you have managed to collaborate with is just totally impressive. So well done.
Thank you. Well, we are open to collaboration, definitely.
Right, still, that's ambitious. Fantastic. So now we're gonna take a round of questions. So yes, if there are any questions, yes. Would you mind coming to the pulpit? Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna.
Hello, thank you for this very extensive and a bit overwhelming to talk about fantastic collaboration work. I would be very interested if you could say something about how this is managed, because all these institutions are just names. They contain people, and you are one person. And I think that the fact that many avoid so many collaborators is because the more partner you have, the more relations you have, it also, there are benefits, but it's also a big logistic to cover and to keep these relations and to kind of harvest, or how do you say, to keep this garden of all these fantastic potential. How do you do the management of this whole factory of yeah.
Excellent question. What's your name? Sorry.
Nana Melan.
Nana, excellent question. I mean, one thing that I had kind of skipped in my presentation was exactly like to talk about the new curatorial format. I'm one person, but actually behind me or in front of me, around me, we are many. And the way we are structuring the collaboration, and we started this project more than a year ago. We started in July 2020, without knowing that we would win or not, was to actually create like weekly Zoom meeting during the pandemic with the main researchers in the institutions. So at CERN with Monica Bello, at the Niels Bohr Institute with Ian Siort and Irene Tamborra, and then IMC, the Interactive Mind Center with the leading professor Andreas Roptov, and the same with Joe Dummett in UC Davis. So what we have tried to do was like to highlight exactly, because I had an intuition, which was like the movements is around us. But then this whole year of constant sort of like weekly meetings really offered us and also my colleagues at Copenhagen Contemporary the possibility of developing like and understanding these areas. One aspect that then we have developed was exactly, we have to create research residencies for the artists to come. We have selected like 10 artists, and based also on the possibility of like developing different works in autonomy, because the premise with all the research partners was that we want to create we want to work on something that is for the public space, because the problem with the academia, what they felt was that because we feel that we are like sort of isolated and we don't have opportunities to share this all knowledge that we are collecting and elaborating in different formats that are understandable also and for a larger audience. So we have created, for example, myself, I have now an office at the Niels Bohr Institute, and because I'm based in Copenhagen, where artists will come every month to spend during 2022 the amount of time that they can spend with the researcher. And the encounters are very, I mean, right now, I mean, the Niels Bohr Institute, for example, has organized a Yule calendar. So they every day there is somebody from the university, from the research team, and somebody from the artist team of the Yet It Moves that participates in talking about what they're doing, who they are, and the sharing motivation. And that's a very basic way also of like getting to know each other. but what I've kind of experienced in the last 2 months was exactly that. It's at lunchtime, it's in this break where you really meet the people, and the people open up in a less scientific or less academic manner. What are they interested of? And so recently, like my last lunches have been about the expansion of the universe in a form of a compression, and this this whole like understanding of like black holes, where they're coming from, and I mean I know nothing if not what we all read in the newspaper in a way, but it really becomes a way of like sharing knowledge, but also from our perspective, it becomes from the art sector perspective, it becomes a way of like really talking about also what artists are doing that is not just like painting and sculpture in many ways, so this is what we are doing. And the same goes with CERN. We have met several times, and from next year we have a collaboration with the Black Quantum Futurists, and where they would develop a project that is based both at CERN and in Copenhagen, between Copenhagen Contemporary actually and the Lindsborg Institute. So this is just like, and the same way goes for the other institutions. We have organized both online but also like physical residencies, and I think the assumption of this project is that the important part is the process. And so there is an aspect that, I mean, I would say the emphasis of all the research partners has been, this has to be about the process. We have to come out of this, and we have to have, we need to have the feeling that we have learned, that we have really ventured this aspect in which, also for myself as a curator, I guess like the team that I'm working with, where you really cross the boundary of like being a curator or being an artist, and the same goes for the scientists, So what I keep saying is that I'm creating this project the same way they are creating this project. So I don't know, sometimes it's very easy as a curator to already imagine how you would like to do the project, and it's exactly how I would like not to do it.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Did the answer to your question?
I think it's a good beginning. I'm thankful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Do we have any other question from the audience? Okay, so then it means that I have the privilege to ask a question of my own. I think often when we think about art in the public room, we also think in terms of users and groups of users. And I think with your project, what is really interesting is that you shift the level of analysis from the users to the body itself. But obviously, whose body it is, it's not neutral. It's a political question. But at the same time, the way itself we talk about the body is a scale, or the level rather at which we look at the body, is also super important. So I was wondering whether you could say a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, that's something that, thanks for asking, Joanna, because that's exactly that's at the core. I can only say that we are dealing with this topic with the artists and the researchers on this method, because the way we move in the space exactly is the way in which the able body, the urban landscape is made for an able body. And I mean, I would say that in Scandinavian countries is even more. I have myself experienced like being on a wheelchair for a long time, and I couldn't do this like in Italy, where I was born, because there is no sort of like structure, or the city is not made for. So I think that exactly thinking also about movement of the body is also thinking about the movement of the way in which the body also perceives stimuli and signals, which is waves of sound, which is inputs, light inputs. So heat, for example, which is heat, like the heat, when we perceive like this feeling of comfort, is it exactly, that's exactly the same. When we are feeling good, we feel warm, because heat is like the explosion of all the particles in the body. So there is so many things, and I mean, I feel maybe I'm too premature to say anything in relation to that, but I can only say that that we are thinking about. I mean, that's a priority. So,
yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Irene, for joining us today. So yes, we're gonna say goodbye to you now.
Thank you so much to everybody for being there, for listening, and I hope you connect.